This is the Pharmaverse Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Pietrack, engaging leaders from the pharma universe. Hello and welcome to the Pharmaverse. I'm your host, Michael Pietrack. If you're a leader or an aspiring leader in the pharmaceutical industry, you're going to gain so much from today's guest, Bob Azelby. Let me just tell you a little bit about him. He's a 30-year veteran. He started his career at Glaxo as a sales rep, and then after getting his MBA from Harvard, he went to Amgen as an associate director of marketing, and then in just 12 short years, he worked his way up to the vice president and general manager over Amgen's oncology business unit. He was the chief commercial officer at Juno, building their commercial organization until its sale. Then he became the CEO of two small biopharma companies. One he led through another sale and another one he took public. And now he serves on several biopharma company boards. He's a student of leadership. He's here to share his insights. Bob Azelby, welcome to the Pharmaverse.
Michael, great to see you. Thanks so much. Really appreciate the opportunity today.
Yeah, I'm excited about this. And, your story, let's start it when you're at Amgen. Okay, you walk in there as a Harvard MBA, as the associate director of marketing. Did you ever dream that you would elevate to the vice president and general manager?
No, it's actually a funny story, Michael. So by the time I left HBS in 97, I had a couple roles before I ended up at Amgen. And as a classic cocky MBA student, I was at Amgen for about a year. And I told my brother that, I wasn't moving up fast enough. And basically, with only an older brother could coach you to say, why don't you shut up, put your head down and deliver something. And that was really great coaching by my brother. And then the next 15 years at Amgen was magnificent. I still bleed Amgen blue today. And so, there's a lot of serendipity in life, as you know. I joined, there was about 3,000 employees at Amgen. It was about a $3 billion company. And by the time I left, it was 20,000 people and about a $20 billion company. And with that type of growth, you get great opportunities. And so I feel really fortunate that, that really worked out. But no, I never thought, you go to Amgen and you don't know what life's going to play out. But I feel very, very fortunate.
Good. Yeah. And sometimes you need a big brother to lead you in the right direction.
No doubt about it.
When I think about our audience, a lot of the listeners are somewhere on that upward journey. They're at their company. They're feeling the same way you did when you called your brother. What were some of the risks that you took? What were some of the critical decisions that helped you get there?
Yeah, I think the key thing, and obviously I have an incredibly supportive wife and supportive kids. And so when I was kind of working my way up through Amgen, if there was an opportunity, even if I had to pack up and move, but I thought it would help my career, I would do that, right? And so I've always been a big believer in that life's about choices, right? There were some folks that worked at Amgen, but they had really tight roots to Thousand Oaks in Southern California and wouldn't take those roles, to move. And so my wife and I moved 10 times in our first 20 years of dating and being married. And so if there was an opportunity that would help set me up for another opportunity, if that meant packing up, I'd do that. And that included, moving to Philadelphia and then back to Thousand Oaks, moving to the Netherlands, back to Thousand Oaks, and ultimately, leaving Amgen to go to Juno. There was risk inherent there, but it was, I think the risk, sometimes we overplay the risk. And if you really map it out and say, if it really goes south, how bad will it be? And usually it's very recoverable. And so, I've always been in that mindset of, if I can get an opportunity that helps me, I'll take it.
Yeah, good teaching points there. I agree with you. Life is all about the decisions. I tell my kids, your life will be an accumulation of decisions. And so really great nugget there. So when you're leading an organization as large as Amgen, and then you go to Juno to build a team from scratch, what are the different leadership skills that a person needs?
Well, first of all, the big change is as you're getting recruited from a big company, whether you're at Amgen or Pfizer or Lilly, the recruiters always ask, hey, you're going to a small biotech, can you roll up your sleeves, right? Really dig in because you don't have a supporting staff. And of course the answer is yes, of course I can do it. And I would tell you that was probably the greatest learning for me. So I get to Juno, I'm the only commercial person, the first one. And I had a team of 800 at Amgen. And then you got to go back and think about all the skills back 10 years ago that you're really rusty at. And I made a lot of mistakes. And so, I always laughed at, when I started at Juno, I called the same vendors on the commercial side that I used at Amgen. But what I found out was I was getting the D team at a small biotech because we weren't writing big checks. We're at Amgen because we're big and we're a big part of the business. I was getting the A team, and so big struggle as it relates to being a sole contributor again, and dusting off the cobwebs of the technical skills you used a decade earlier. The other element is just like anywhere else, you walk into a new small biotech. You have to earn your credibility and your trust. Yeah, they hired you, but they have teams. When I joined Juno, it was roughly 200 folks there. They don't care where you're from. You have to work the relationships and build the relationships, build the credibility. Where after 15 years at Amgen, it's home, right? You really know everybody and you know how the processes work. And then you walk into a new small biotech and you got to start all over. And so that's one. And then number two, when you're at a small biotech, at least on the commercial side, most of the folks there have no idea what commercial is, right? So there's a huge educational element to the R&D side of the house, because at the end of the day, when budget season comes up, the R&D side's like, why do you have to give that guy so much money? How hard is commercial, right? So you're selling all the time, you're building trust, you're trying to build credibility.
Wow. So leading a group of 800, then going to a company of just a couple hundred.
Yeah,
What a culture
no
shock.
reports. I had no
Oh my God.
reports at that time.
Hey, and you talked about your vendors. I was one of your vendors at that time. I wasn't the D team, was I?
No, not at all, not
Okay.
at all. But it was more like the big consulting firms that you may use, right? And
Yeah.
just that was a big insight, but it totally makes sense, right? They're gonna go to the place that's buttering their bread.
Yeah, I'm just busting your chops. But so as the chief commercial officer at Juno, there was an incredible platform there in the CAR T space. Some of the people that are listening are trying to bring a novel therapy to market, maybe a pioneering platform to the market. What insights, what advice or challenges are going to be facing them?
Yeah, the three big learnings I had there was number one. There's no straight line to success, right? Like when you're at a small biotech and you're dealing with really innovative science and a really innovative platform, you're going to have ups and downs, and some of the downs can be really, really hard. So, like at Juno in our JCAR 15 program, a couple patients died in the program, right?
Really?
They were late stage products, but that can really shake a company to its core. And so, resiliency, I would say, is number one, right? To make sure that you're hiring people that have been there, done that, so they have excellent technical capabilities, but also resiliency and knowing that you're going to run into obstacles, but they have to be excited to attack those obstacles. So that's one. Number two, I would say, if you start to scale the organization, if you grow too fast, yeah, we grew from 200 to 600 at Juno, and basically sometimes what happens, you put people in leadership roles who have never led people. And that becomes really, really challenging, right? Because there's a skill set. At Amgen, you had the opportunity to take one role, then you get another role, and you're putting those skill sets together and leading larger groups as you go along, rather than just getting thrown into the deep end of the pool. So thinking about when you're going to scale your organization, it's not just about technical capability, it's about leadership and management. Really, really important. And then the third, with a real new innovative program, is when you think about the U.S. healthcare system, you think if you come out with a really innovative drug that the world's going to change for you, the systems will change, reimbursement will change. And my experience has been the exact opposite. The systems in the United States are so ingrained that you have to make sure your technology fits into the system rather than hoping for the system to adapt to your new innovation. It's just, you can go the other route, but I think that's a really, really long journey.
Yeah, those are three great tips for anyone that's in that situation. And from the recruiting point of view, it's so true. That second point about how to scale, when to scale, because I find companies get into this pickle where they're like, well, I know we're going to need these people, but let's wait to see what the FDA says. But then if you wait for the FDA's decision, then you're way behind. So it's really this, it takes some bravery to make those decisions.
It doesn't. I even think it's harder today, with the healthcare investors, at least in the mid to small biotech, where every nickel counts, right? And you're trying to make your money last as long as possible. And so what happens there, you're late, right? And all the things that you think you would do to launch a product well or to execute a good clinical trial, you're delayed because you're waiting for another time point. So I think that's a great comment, Michael.
Yeah, all right. So Juno sells. Now you find yourself as the CEO of Alder. And what's it like leading the whole company? What insights can you share there?
Yeah, so number one, I gained, when I took that Alder role, I gained a greater appreciation what Hans Bishop, my CEO at Juno, had to handle. And I think the number one thing when you're a CEO, especially of a publicly traded biotech, you're on 24/7. And what I mean by that is you're not actually working 24 hours, 7 days a week, but you're thinking about your company 24 hours every day, 7 days a week, right? And so it becomes all encompassing associated with your day-to-day living, which can be great, but also you never get a break from it. Then the second big thing, I was tasked with going to Alder. It was a 15-year-old company started by four founders, was really to go in and prepare the company for launch and actually bring in a new C-suite, right? And so, that was significant change that had to go on there. And so, the big learning for me is, you know, I've been told, a fish rots at the head. The same thing,
Right.
so does a company, right? So you got to get folks around the table that have trust in one another, right? That are actually can work cohesively together. Because if you don't, you start getting fractures with the organization, and it's easy to say, but it's really, it's quite hard to do. So that number one. And then, if anyone was going in to take any role in a larger organization, I read the book The First 90 Days. And so I actually think that book, if you're going to take a new role, is an incredible book. And so I've used it 5 or 6 times to where I would interview when I first got there about 30% of the entire staff. And we're about a 200-person company. So I interviewed about 70 people at all levels. And I asked them the same four questions. What makes this place great? If you were me, what would you do tomorrow? And then the fourth one is, what are you afraid that I'll change that would really disappoint you? And the amazing thing is when you ask 60 people, a good representation of the company, the consistency in the messages coming back is remarkable, right? That the people in the company know exactly what the right thing to do is when you take a sample. And so then when you stand back in front of them and you say, hey, this is what you told me, therefore this is our priorities and this is how we're going to execute it, you get buy-in because the answers actually came from the organization, which always has the answer when, rather than someone flying in new and not really knowing it. And so, that was a real big learning. And so I've continued to kind of use that process going forward. And it's a really simple book and I highly recommend it.
I've recommended it too. And I really love that fourth question because I find that people are really worried, especially when a new leader comes in, like, is he going to move my cheese or he or she going to move my cheese? And they're worried about that more than anything else, more than what may be gained. They're scared of what may be lost or disrupted.
I would also say, just to add to that on the change process, totally agree. I think the bigger concern is, hey, I know how I was judged in the past and I got A's, like I did really well. Is this person going to come in and change my role or change my metrics? And so change creates uncomfort because you don't know if you can control your destiny. And so totally agree with your insights there.
Yeah. All right. Cool. So then you're that Alder sells. Now you're the CEO of Elium, and you had to take that company public. What were the challenges there?
Yeah, so that was kind of really unique. So we started that company in COVID, right? And so when I joined with two of my colleagues from Alder, and then we joined a team of six that was located in Cambridge, England. That was kind of our R&D engine, right? And so, some of the challenges was, we were operating by Zoom, right? So it was a totally Zoom effort, and although Zoom's a great tool, when you're building a company, I think we struggled a little bit with, cultural differences and really gaining trust of one another because we were only on meetings together, right? You get on and our windows were short. So it was 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. on the West Coast to match up. So we had 3 hour slots to kind of engage. But you're not going to lunch together. You're not sitting in the office together, right? You don't really know about their family situation. It's just really hard to get to know one another, and so trust takes a lot longer time to build, right? So now I'm a big believer in you got to spend quality. Although Zoom is great, if you're really going to be a cohesive organization, it's the glue that holds one another together. Is it's the conversations that are non-business like, right? So that's one. And then number two, we had a raise. We raised about $200 million over the next year, and it was an early stage company. And what I found is early stage company is every week there's a challenge, right? And I always joke that if a rat has a bad Friday night in early stage company, Saturday can be a disaster, right? You have a bad animal study, and then next thing you know, you have to change strategy, or you got to do rework, or you got to make additional investments to if there was a safety signal or anything to prove that. And so, the early stage stuff is quite dynamic in terms of little things can have make a huge difference. And so, but again, incredibly exciting journey. And then got into the whole investment side of things when things start to go south in terms of investors wanting to put additional dollars in the biotechs, and so live that world. And that's not an easy challenge. But as anytime things are hard, you're learning a ton, right? And now I believe you're either winning or you're learning, right? And winning is a lot more fun than learning. And so, but an absolutely great experience.
That's great. And to piggyback on your first point, there's been a huge push with industry wide on coming back to work. A lot of CEOs are seeing that is an important part of creating a cohesive unit, especially with an EL leadership team. But even in the departments, a lot of companies are calling people back to work. And it sounds like that is something that as a CEO, you would encourage.
Yeah. So I would. I know, listen, commuting stinks, and when you can work at home, it's more flexible, and you feel like you can be more productive, etc. I think the one thing that I think is going to be interesting to see over the next decade or so is when I was growing up at Amgen, I would pay attention to all the leaders, how they dressed, how they spoke, how they interacted, right? What was their style? And you're constantly learning from that on a day-to-day basis. I sometimes wonder if you're a totally Zoom company and you're only in the meetings, how do younger folks learn and take skills from folks that are further along in their career, right? Because we're all passing it down. But at the end, the world adapts, and maybe you just pick up skills through Zoom, and that's going to be the new leadership way. But that would be a question mark I would have.
That's a great insight, Bob. Thanks for sharing that. So one of the things that I'm excited to learn about is now you're a biopharma company board member. And I get asked, I would say weekly, how do I become a board member? For high level executives, they're asking me this. Any advice, any insights there? And I know, knowing you, you're going to say, I got lucky, but there has to be some methodology.
Yeah. So one, I did get lucky. And I like telling the story that, when I was joining Juno, another person was moving to Seattle, and a recruiter put us together, and we went and had a beer, and we realized that we competed against each other. When I was at Amgen and he was at J&J, like head to head, and we laughed at how we thought each side was terrible, right, in terms of how we were. And then the next thing you know, he says, hey, I need commercial representation on my board. Would you want to do that? And I was like, of course. And so I broke the seal that way, right? So, in that way. But now when I sit back and I think about how you do it, one, you got to break the seal, right? Because once you're on a board, then all of a sudden more boards come because you have experience. And the one recommendation I would make is don't forget that the main recruiters in biotech, such as yourself or Egon Zender or Russell Reynolds, who are placing the CMOs, the CCOs, they're also placing the boards, right? So make sure you're engaging and staying close with recruiters such as yourself, Michael, to where you tell them that you're interested, and so you're top of mind for them. And so it's all about the networking side of things, but easier said than done.
Yeah, great tip. Great tip. So as you're sitting on these boards, you have to have such a high vantage point on all the challenges that pharmaceutical companies are facing? Of course, some companies have their own unique challenges because of their therapies. But what would you say across the board are some of the big challenges facing pharma companies today?
Yeah, so to me, and I'll move it more to small to mid-sized biotech, right? Because
Okay.
I think pharma's still in good shape, relative to the, really what's changed. So I would say from 2000, let's say 11 to 2021, the investments in biotech and pharma was unbelievable for small to mid-sized biotech, right? In the sense of, they were funding money and then someone would acquire them. And so it was just a bustling business. And then at the back end of 21, the faucet shut off. And so the ability to raise, first of all the stock prices of publicly traded biotechs fell dramatically, right? And then number two, to raise additional capital became really challenging. And I think that's the number one challenge today. And the reason for that is, inflation and interest rates. And so when you think about someone running discounted cash flows, meaning if I invest in this company today and they're going to generate a product in 2030, and then the revenues from 2030 to 2040, I discount them back. If the rates are higher, that means you get a much lower valuation, right? And so that's where the real challenge is. I think there was good news yesterday. The Fed said that they're thinking about cutting rates in 2024. You saw stocks boom yesterday, and so it's all about how the financial models work in terms of their return on investments. And I think that's the number one challenge. And I think you made a comment earlier, Michael. When you don't know you're going to raise, you have to have a key milestone. Like you have to flip over clinical data, and that's even no guarantee. And so what you're trying to do is take the money you have and make it last as long as possible so you can turn over as many cards as possible to give you a chance to raise additional dollars. And now it's become more of, how do I live to the next milestone? And I think that's a big challenge for small to mid-sized biotech today. I think that's the biggest challenge by far.
Yeah. Okay. That's very interesting. Now, I know that you're a student of leadership, and you love sharing insights. You were telling me the story about how you read a leadership book, like, and you share the insights with your kids. What is some of the best leadership advice you've either gotten from what you've read or maybe from a mentor?
Yeah, so I would say probably, we talked about, my 15-year career with Amgen, and that was a great run. But I would say if I didn't have a great manager who gave me really candid feedback, my run at Amgen would have been stunted. And so the story I like to tell is I was a regional sales director. I went out to Philadelphia. We were number one in the country, won chairman. So we had a great year. So I come back for my performance review, thinking it's going to be really, really good. And my boss says, "Bob, we have a problem." I'm like, "What do you mean we have a problem? Like, did you see the sales results?" And he says, "People think you're a bully on the inside, the people in Thousand Oaks, because you're so demanding to get resources for your field teams that people feel underappreciated." And I said to my boss, like, "Oh, Chris, that's not true." And he says, "Bob, it doesn't matter what you think. It only matters what other people think." And so as I licked my wounds from a very tough development conversation, I realized he was right. And I joke, well, it was true. At Amgen, we were allowed to give away $100 Amex gift cards to anybody we thought who was helping us. And then I joked that I became Santa Claus to everybody internally that I was handing them out, because I realized that I needed those folks to win. And so if he doesn't give me that really candid feedback, I probably derail myself. And so, so that's number one. Number two, I would say is, making sure, that, your people's perception of you is reality, and having people that actually tell you that is really, really important. And then, I'll go back to another book, called The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. One mentor said, "Hey, listen, if you want to build great teams, this is a great book to read." And, you read it and it makes so much sense, but it's really hard to do. And it's those types of pieces and other books and mentoring. And then the last piece I said is, I took jobs that I didn't think were in my best interest. And I turned out that I was wrong, right? Like going to the Netherlands, because at Amgen, people that went to Europe didn't always get back in good roles, right? And that puts a lot of stress on the family when you move them, to a whole new country. And I was wrong, and so I was wrong. My bosses were like, "Take this job. I think it'll set you up for the next one." And many times I was like, "Oh, I don't know," and they were right. So find yourself good mentors. I've had great ones, and they facilitated a lot of my movements, which I'm extremely grateful for.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I think the mark of a great leader is someone that can tell you the hard truth.
Uh,
And I know from my perspective, sometimes with my team, that's really hard to do because you don't want to upset the apple cart. You don't want to hurt their feelings, but you need to tell them the hard truth.
So,
Uh,
so, 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 Michael, totally agree, and we can talk a little bit. I think it's really
okay.
important. So, my brother Joe and I wrote a book called "Kiss Your Butt Goodbye" back in 2012, and
Oh,
really, the premise is most people sit around waiting for the manager to give them advice. Not advice, but am I doing well? Am I not doing well? And you just said it. As a manager, it's really hard to give really candid feedback, right? So we all blame the manager if we don't get good feedback. My premise now is you know what you're good at. You know what your development area. You should go find it. You can ask your peers. You can ask your spouse, right? Because whatever development areas you have at home, they're showing up at work. And so now I've become a big believer in you can't wait for your manager to give you good advice. You should seek it, but you should go find it out on your own because it's usually a derailer that you don't know about that stops your career from moving forward. In fact, in large career talent management discussions at Amgen, we're in a room, right? All the senior managers, we put a person's picture on there, their experience. The question people want ask if they're going to hire, what's the development area? What's the thing I need to be concerned about? Well, how is this person going to cause my team disruption, right? And so it's not. It's a little bit about, and I do believe play to your strengths, but to make sure you kind of soften whatever development area or derailer that you may have is incredibly important.
good insights. I'm thinking about our audience. Some of our listeners are aspiring leaders, and some of them are frustrated with how long it's taking them to get their big break. Their move to Switzerland or that boss that'll to help them move up. What encouragement could you share with them?
Yeah, I think one, stick with it, right? And keep doing your job, right? Keep engaging with your manager, asking what we just talked about is asking for really solid feedback, and don't be defensive when you get the feedback, right? Take it as a gift, right? Make it easier for the manager to give you feedback. In fact, go to your manager and proactively say, "Hey, I think I'm really good at this. I think I need to develop this." And most of the time, it's not on the technical side. It's on the personality or the behavioral side,
Mm,
right? To make sure you really understand, that. So take ownership of that particular element. And then the last thing I would say is, too many people I think would say, "Oh, Jimmy or Mary hired that person because of favoritism, or someone else works the system." Right? It becomes a little bit of a crutch to make an excuse or to become a victim, right? And
yeah.
once it may make you feel better, but then you've lost control of it, right? You've lost control of your career if you think it's so and so's hiring somebody because they're best friends, right? And my bias is most people are all trying to move up the ladder. And so they're trying to hire the best people they can to enable them to move up to the next ladder. And so stay at it, talk to your manager regularly, but also do a lot of deep introspection on if Mary got the promotion and you didn't, what does Mary do that you don't? Right? Is there a piece of that? And to really try to identify that, because in my experience is most people are trying to hire people to make their team better so they can progress.
Yeah, great advice. Takes a lot of humility to do that. And like you said, self-reflection.
Really hard to do. Really hard to do. But it's there, and by the way, I'll just give the last thing is
Sure.
if you have a development area, the greatest thing you can do is to be open about it and tell people about it, and tell them that you're working on it, because they know it. The people you work with know your development area, right? But yet they love the fact that if you say, yeah, they're like, thank God they know about that, right? And that they're working on it, right? That all of a sudden that shows great humility, right? Great individual development. And so I think most folks are reticent to really talk about what the development areas are. I think it's a huge competitive advantage if you do, and then you tell people you're working on it, and obviously you have to put a plan together to work for it. So, that's been my experience at least.
Bob, on behalf of all listening, I just want to thank you for your time and your willingness to share your wisdom with us. I know I've benefited. You've given us a lot to think about and reflect on with our careers, so thank you. Bob Azelby is a great follow on LinkedIn. Also, feel free to connect with me. And that wraps up this episode of the Pharmaverse. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.
Michael, thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us on the Pharmaverse Podcast. Make sure you subscribe below so you don't miss any leadership insights. Like and comment. I would love to hear from you. We'll see you on the next episode of Pharmaverse.